want you to look in your book, if you would, to the 5th chapter of the book of Genesis, and I want to read one verse there, and I want to read a verse in the 6th chapter, just to establish some thinking about age. And this is going from old to young, so we might go in the other direction. I don't think so. And I'm not going to talk to you very long. I was talking to, I think, Brother Harney before the service I was at a place the other day where the guy, he started preaching at 11:30 Sunday morning and didn't quit till 12:35, and he never said anything in the whole 65 minutes. And that was pretty rough to sit through, but anyway. Notice in verse 32 of Genesis chapter 5, Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, I don't know if they were triplets, but when he was 500, he had those 3 boys. I never thought about that before until yesterday, and they probably weren't. But then I want you to notice in chapter 6, in verse number 3, and the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. So things changed between the 5th chapter of the book of Genesis and after the flood. Men didn't live as long. I looked a little bit yesterday just for some background in my mind. Lamech, who was Noah's dad, was 182 years old when Noah was born. To put that in perspective, Noah was a contemporary. He was alive when Abraham's father was alive. Lamech, Noah's dad, he was 55 years old when Adam died. See, these men lived so long, their lives overlapped so much. I got a little habit of making things stand out on my Bible, and it might be because of my eyesight over the years. But in chapter number 5, it says, and he died in verse 5, and he died in verse 8, and he died in verse 11, and he died in verse 14, and 17, and 20, and Enoch, of course, he didn't die, but verse 27 and also in verse 31. And so I fill in the vowels, the A and the D, so they stick out. They jump off the page for my eyes. And the letter E, and then the D, and the E, and the D, and died. And it helps me, I guess, to see those. And all those men died all through there, but their lives overlapped. Now, I don't know anybody in my lifetime, and maybe in Brother Harney's, as old as he is, somebody that lived 120 years. I only know one preacher, old preacher. I remember talking to him on his 112th birthday, and he lived to be 114 down in North Carolina. But I don't know too many people that make it to 100. Few make it to 90. You wonder why things changed. I think there's a couple of things to think about. I believe the atmosphere changed. Of course, there was no pollution. It had never rained before Noah. The earth was watered by the dew of the ground. So things changed drastically as far as the climate. There was no diseases. The very first mention of a disease is in Exodus chapter 15 and verse number 26, so they were healthy. There was no wars until Genesis chapter 12 that are recorded in the Bible, so people weren't getting killed that way. And I looked in an old Bible that I have written, got the notes in it by a fellow by the name of Dake. And Dake was an Armenian, so he kind of goes that way, but he has a lot of information. Do you have a Dake's Bible? It's got a lot of information in there. And we were talking about it today when we were eating, and I think Timothy and maybe the rest of the family had gone to the Ark recently. And if I remember what he said today at the dinner table, that they said down there at the Ark that there were 19 billion people on earth. Is that right?
Potentially.
But 19 billion when Noah and his family got on the ark. And this Bible that I looked at yesterday, the notes I looked at yesterday, if there had been no flood to destroy 19 billion people minus 8, there would have been today on this planet 160 billions of people. Now we only have about 8 billion. So, there have been all kinds of rampant diseases, and I don't know how many billions of people have been born. I do know this, that up until 1949, only that many people had ever been born that were on planet Earth at that time in 1949. And of course, in our country, there was less than 100 million people in 1949. That's the year I was born, and now we have 330 million or so. So population has changed a lot, and it changed a lot in between this 5th chapter and 6th chapter. Now, again, I'm 70 years old, so I'm going to talk about the times of our lives when we reach 70. 70, I guess that's, you're venerable, I would say. I guess I could also say decrepit, at least in my case, have a hard time getting around. But there's a lot of people important people that never reach the age of 70. Men who changed the world that never made it to 60. None of the major prophets made it to 60 years of age. Jeremiah and Isaiah and that crowd. Of course, Moses is called a prophet, and he lived to be 120, but he's not a prophet in the sense that men were prophets in the latter part of the Old Testament. Alexander the Great didn't make it to 60. Julius Caesar didn't. William the Conqueror, Shakespeare, Mozart, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, none of them. Chopin, Dickens, Napoleon, Keats, Shelley, Byron, Lincoln, Tyndall, Whitfield, Spurgeon, none of those men made it to 60 years of age. And yet they accomplished, all of them are well-known people that accomplished great things. When you get in your 60s and 70s, if you're just going to be honest, and you need to be about it, we're in the autumn of our life when you get to that age. You don't really feel old. I still look at some people and I think they're old, but they probably think I'm old. The preacher said today he saw some pictures of these preachers and stuff getting these religious papers, and occasionally he said, well, at least your picture looks like you. I was 2 times it happened in churches where I preach every year. One was in Florida, and the other one was in North Carolina. And ladies who are in their late 80s or early 90s, they said to me, and they knew my dad, and they said to me, they said, oh, you look so much like your dad. And I looked at those old gals and I said, hey, my dad's 90 years old. Do I look that bad already? But it feels like it sometimes in the autumn of our lives. I think it ought to be a time of harvest. I think it ought to be a time of softening and a cooling of the atmosphere and the climate of our lives. I don't think I'm not threatened or intimidated by young preachers that are having some success. I don't even worry about that. I don't think we need to worry about what other people do if we could just take care of ourselves. A lot of old guys are dying. I want to see young preachers succeed. I want to see them live right and do right and take a stand and have a backbone and still believe what we've always believed as far as old-time religion. I think when you get in your 70s, you need to prepare physically, take care of yourself. I take more pills. 2 handfuls of pills. Some of them I have to take. Some of them I feel like I need to take, vitamins and stuff like that. But there's, I had shingles a year and a half ago. They lasted, I don't know how many months, but now I have their ugly brother. I have this nerve damage that they did it's called post-herpetic neuralgia. It's worse than the shingles at times. Yesterday it was bad. The heat is bad on them. I can feel them right now. They don't seem to they're not bothering me. I don't worry about them. And about every time I talk to my father, he asks me about them, and I have to tell the same story. I got post-herpetic neuralgia. And what is that? And it's a nerve problem that came from them. Well, you think you'll get over it? I said, Dad, I'm not worried about it. And I'm not. I can't do anything about it. I just keep taking the pills. The doctor, my doctor, I go in there and we talk. He said, what do you think? Oh, I think I ought to get this prescription again and that. And he said, okay. I doctor myself, and I don't know what they charge the insurance for that, but it's probably not good. I think grandparents and great-grandparents have a tremendous opportunity coupled with an obligation to have an impact on our grandchildren. There's a lot of things we can't do, but there's a lot of things that we can do and we ought to do in regard to helping them along the road of life. I heard a story about a grandmother, and she was sitting there with her little 4-year-old granddaughter on her lap, and her grandmother said to her, what color is that apple there, honey? And the little girl said, red. And she said, well, what color is the grass out there? And the little girl said, green. And he said, what color is the sky up? Oh, it's blue. She said, what color are the clouds? She said, white. And the little girl looked at her grandma and said, it seemed like by now you'd know your colors, Grandma. Was that any better?
That's pretty funny.
A little better.
That's pretty good.
Thanks, Timothy. I heard another one about a grandma. She was talking to her little granddaughter. See how you like this one, boy. She was talking to her little grandchild, and she said, when I was a girl, I had a pony. And when I was a little girl, my dad, he made a swing for me. He tied a rope up in the tree and put a tire on there, and that was my swing. And she said, honey, when I was a little girl, we used to go down the creek and go swimming. And when I was a little girl, we'd do this and that. And the little 4-year-old looked up at her grandma and said, I wish I'd have known you back then. You seemed like you were a lot more fun. You like that one too? Good. I'm getting warm now, huh? It's strange. I told my wife this week, just talking, I never thought I'd be this old. We were going to have our 50th wedding anniversary next month. I never anticipated that. I didn't anticipate being shorter, but it never came across my mind, my thinking that you'd ever get to this point in life. And I don't know, I might have said something like this morning, but we hardly go out anymore unless we go to the doctor. And I think the preacher and I were coming. I don't know I don't think Sister O'Brien was in the car yet, but maybe she was. We went to the doctor, and she said, "Will you go in with me?" I said, "Sure." So you go back behind there, and the first thing they do, they put my wife on the scales. And the lady just blurted out how much my wife weighed. I about had a heart attack. I didn't know she had weighed that much. I told her, I said, honey, that's how much I weighed when I graduated from high school. And that was a long time ago. I'm telling this, I hope you're not sending this back to her.
We're streaming it.
Yeah, thanks, live streaming it right to my house. Thank God she doesn't know how to do that.
She loves you so much, she wanted to see you tonight.
Thank you, Timothy. How come you're not sitting out there or go somewhere else? It's a lot of things are different as you get old. Old age kind of creeps up on us with silent footsteps. It makes us noisy. I mean, you ought to hear my wife and I get out of the car. Grunts and groans and, what's the matter with you? Well, the same thing's the matter with you as the matter with me. It's pretty hard to do. A lot of things change. Breath becomes shorter and your shadows get longer, and aches and pains and are constant companions, and You get to a place it's time to let others bear the yoke, and you need to drop what you can't do and keep doing what you can do. I thought about that thing about our shadows lengthening. We have an opportunity as we get older. I don't know how many young preachers call me now. I've got 2 young preachers that aren't my sons, but 2 young preachers that really love me, and I love them back. And God's let me have their ear, and I think God's let me have their heart, and I want to invest. That's how I can keep going after I'm gone, is in those young people. And you have young people that God will bring across the path of your life, that your shadow can affect them and impact them for old-time religion's sake. I can talk about things from 50 years ago, and I can impart those things to young preachers who will live perhaps as long as I have lived, and maybe older. And so I hold in my hands, and you hold in your hands, a century, 50 years of your past that you can communicate and draw from to try to help people, and you can impart some things, and they can carry it on for another 40, 50 years and impact some more young people and make a difference in the lives of people. I think that's an important thing. I think it's a vital thing. I think one of the things that old people do is that they just quit. They join the spit and whittle crowd. One of the dumb things about Michigan Christians, and I don't notice it as much here, I think you folks, Ohio people, seem to just go to Kentucky. But Michigan people, they would go to Florida. They would go down there for all winter long, and they went to church. They didn't go to the home church up there, but they would go down there and play shuffleboard. And why would you want to do something like that with your life? It'd be better to stay involved and to witness to people and pass out tracts. And I think, we live in a weird day now with all this rioting and all this mess, but hopefully things will get back to the old normal. I hope this isn't the new normal, but sometimes you talk to people now, they punch you in the mouth or something, but that doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen everywhere. But I have respect for elderly people, now that I am one especially. But I've always had respect for them and look up to them. I think a lot about them. I think we need to keep Jesus in the picture all the time. There's an old poem. It goes like this: "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made, our times are in his hands, who saith, the whole I planned." I'm glad that God has planned our lives out. I'm glad God knows. There's another little statement, the sweetest note in seraph's song, the sweetest note on mortal tongue, the sweetest music ever known, Jesus, only Jesus. As the book of our lives closes, there's some things I want you to think about. Number one, when you get in your 70s and 80s perhaps, be an encourager. Try to encourage people. I don't think folks need to be discouraged. I don't like hanging around people that are, I can get discouraged on my own. I don't need any help. God help us to be an encourager. Be positive about them. Be a helper. There's a young preacher just took a church that had a terrible history, big problem some years ago. It still hangs over that church. It's down close to where I live. And he's taken the church, and he's helped me set up my computer, and he helps me do a few things around the house. And they had a church-owned rental house. What in the world they wanted to do that for, I don't know. Right next door to the church, and the people moved out. And, it's kind of like, they just wrecked everything. You heard that story about that preacher got fired, didn't you? And the deacons told him, said, now you're going to have to get out of the parsonage, and I want that parsonage left exactly the way it was when you moved in. Well, the preacher's wife, she went down to the pet store, and she said, I'd like to order 1,000 mice and 15,000 cockroaches. And that pet store said, what in the world do you want that for? He said, they told us, I'm the preacher's wife, we had to leave the parsonage just the way we found it. So, yeah, good for her. God help us to be, but I said that to say this. He said, I got to have a work day. I said, it was a Saturday, maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. I was home. I said, me and Sandy will come and help you. I don't go to that church. I'm not a member there. My wife cleaned that kitchen. I could not. She is a clean machine, what that girl is. Now, she doesn't mess with either one of my offices at the house, and they're a mess. So if you came to my house and you looked at you say, there's bums live here. Well, one bum lives at our house, me. But she cleaned that kitchen. I mean, it was a mess. She cleaned that refrigerator. I don't know, it had all kinds of mess in it. I mean, you had to take a jackhammer to get some of it off. It was terrible. But she cleaned that thing immaculate. I painted one room for the guy. We spent 3 or 4 hours over there. Be a helper. Try to be an encouragement and a blessing to other people. God help us to be real. God help us to be honest. You know, one of my pet peeves, I don't like hearing a preacher who's the hero in every story. Because we always do dumb things. Be real, tell how dumb you are sometimes. People can, I can relate to a preacher who says, well, I did a dumb thing the other day, because I've done 100 dumb things. I did a dumb thing today, didn't I? I think, with my phone. Maybe you can help me with that after church, I don't know. Be a counselor. You have some experience, vast store of experience to share with young people. And you see, in my case, I try to help preachers. You see a young preacher doing something stupid, say, hey, bud, that ain't going to work. That's not going to work at all. Don't grow bitter. I think that's another problem as we get in our 70s and 80s. We can get bitter. We can get critical. Things aren't like they were back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about, back in the 20th century. Who would have thought that the 70s and to the mid-80s were really a highlight near the end of the greatness, in my opinion, of old-time fundamentalism. And things have changed, and the people that are the heroes today, they got problems, and they're going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. But I don't want to grow bitter. God help us to be thankful for what we have and what God has done for us in our lives. I got a preacher friend, I think we mentioned him this morning, Brother Sammy Allen. I was in a meeting, I don't know, it must be close to 30 years with him. And his wife was there. Her name's Jimmy Lou. So she's from down south. They're from Georgia, Jimmy Lou. And I talked to her yesterday on the phone, matter of fact. But she said about 30 years ago, and I've never forgot it. She said, when I married Sammy, she said, I gave up my dreams that he could fulfill his. That's a tremendous thing for a lady to do. And I think most ladies have dreams and aspirations just like guys do. But that dear lady, she gave up her dreams that her husband could fulfill his. That young preacher I talked to you about a minute ago, one of the young preachers, and I think I talked about him this morning too, has such a great library, and he's just 45 years of age. I asked him a few weeks ago, I was preaching for him on a Sunday, and I'd preached in a conference there in Rossville, Georgia, close to where he pastors. And I stayed there in a home with him, and then I preached for him. And I said, it seemed like you told me that you started preaching when you were 18 years old. He said, I did. He said, matter of fact, I started pastoring. I said, when you were 18 years old? He said, preacher, now you think about this. He said, I graduated from high school on Friday. On Saturday, my wife and I got married. And on Sunday, I started pastoring my first church when 18 years old. Graduate from, walk down the aisle with a gown. Saturday, you're in a tuxedo getting married. And 18 years old, start pastoring a church. I said, how long did you pastor that church? He said, too long. About 4 years. He said it was nothing but war, just a war. But how in the world? I mean, that wasn't that long ago. I mean, he's just 45 years old. 18-year-old pastor. It's almost unimaginable. But he said this. He said, we didn't have any money to go on a honeymoon. But he said, this same man, Sammy Allen, came to our wedding. You could imagine this. He said, he took up an offering for us at our wedding. Said we got $53. He said, I put that $53 in my pocket and started that, being a pastor the very next morning. We went on a couple-day honeymoon. He said we didn't have any time to go anywhere. He said, I was working and I needed to work. He said, my water pump went out and it cost me $53 to get it fixed. There went my honeymoon money right there. I said that to say this. I think one of the best things, when you get in your 60s and 70s and 80s, if you've done right, if you've tithed your income, given, God is duty bound to take care of us. I mean, you cannot outgive the Lord. And if you've been careful and conservative, you probably have a few more nickels than you had when you just got married at 20 or 30 or 18 like he did. And God's blessed us, and we have a little more money to be a blessing and a help to people. And one of the most encouraging things, and there was a man, he went to, when I met him, he went to Landmark down there in Cincinnati. And I think he's still alive. I haven't talked to him in 2 or 3 years. But when we moved down here, and I'd met him before, I met him down in Lebanon at a camp meeting that I used to preach at years and years ago. Every single time I've met that man and I shook his hand, he left a $100 bill in the palm of my hand, except the last time. The last time I saw him was at Dr. Rawlings' funeral. And he gave the $100 bill to my wife. I still got a little grudge going right there. But I said that to say this. It's a wonderful thing to be. I love helping young preachers. And some of these guys I preach for and some of the places I've been, and you see a guy with a half a dozen little old kids, and they kind of looked like our family. There were 6 of us in our family. My mother would get us dressed Sunday morning. And by the time she got down to my little sister, 2 or 3 of my brothers looked like they'd been in a fight and been out in a gravel pit or something and have to start all over again. And it's good to be a help to people. And when we get a little age on us, we can be a help. We can be an encouragement. We can be a blessing to other people. Get involved in being a help, being an encouragement as time goes by. My grandfather, I'll tell you this and I'll quit. My grandfather was a preacher, my dad's dad. He didn't start preaching until he was 48 years old. He was a plastering contractor, had a huge business before the Depression. He built beautiful buildings. A lot of his work is still in famous old buildings in Detroit. He had a knack for it. But when the Depression hit, he lost everything. They had a cabin on the lake, and they had a home in Detroit, nice home. It's not in a nice part of town now, but they had to sell one of the houses and end up moving to the house on the lake. My grandfather went off with a WPA for 2 years, never came home. When he finally did come home with 2 bags of groceries, my grandmother fainted. He didn't have anything. And the Depression, the Depression and World War II made a tremendous impact on the character of the American people. And sad to say, we don't have much of that left anymore in our country. But anyway, my grandfather, he surrendered to preach when he was 48 years old. He went down to J. Frank Norris' school. This is Grandpa telling the story now. He went there 1 year, and J. Frank Norris came to him and said, Roy, we can't teach you anything else. Here's your diploma. Go do something. My grandfather started 12 or 13 churches, one in Cairo, Georgia, and the rest of them all in Michigan, and a lot of them are still functioning. They're still winning souls and preaching the gospel. He not only built the buildings, he built the people. I preached for a man 2 weeks ago that went to one of my grandfather's churches way back when. I didn't even know the guy. He told me some interesting stories. But anyway, my granddad, he had retired, and they were living, just in a little house trailer they had. And was trying to do what they can, preach when they could. One day he was at my dad's church, and he would just show up sometimes, and sometimes Dad would let him preach, and sometimes he didn't that night for whatever reason. Maybe my dad had something he really wanted to say, I don't know. And I was in the lobby, and I saw my grandfather. He was standing over in the corner. This was back in the 70s, early 70s. And he was crying. And I thought somebody said something unkind to my granddad. I was a young guy. I was real feisty when I was young. I'm not anymore. I'm kind of laid back, I guess, compared to what I used to be. You say, I don't believe that, Brother Green. You didn't know me back then. Now I said, Grandpa, what's the matter? He said, Tim, we came down here tonight. They drove about 25, 30 miles. And it was I think it was when Jimmy Carter was president, and gas went through the roof up to 75 cents a gallon. And he said, I don't know, son, I didn't know if we have enough money to get home, and I sure wasn't going to tell your dad. And he said, a man just came up and shook my hand and left a $5 bill in my hand. He said it was such a blessing to me, such an encouragement to me. Now, there's been inflation, so you don't need bigger than $5 nowadays, but it's a blessing to be a blessing to others. And I think when you can, you ought to do it. There's times when you can't. There's times when you don't have 2 nickels yourself, and we're not even shaking hands anymore, so that illustration is going to have to go out the window. You remember when we used to shake hands years ago? We don't do that anymore. But I just hope, there's people here tonight in their 20s, and there's little children back here, and there's people in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. There might be somebody in their 80s. And I know when our dear sister Virgie used to sit down right around there in her 90s, and she was a blessing as she was a senior citizen. And God help us to be that to other people as we grow old. And I mentioned that shadow. If you go out there about this time of night, and if the sun's shining just right, you can see your shadow lengthens, it's long. And we all have a shadow that affects other people, and folks cross our paths, the path of our shadow, and our shadow falls upon them, and we can be a help and encouragement. There's a great text, and I'm going to quit because I've talked about 3 minutes longer than I planned. There's a great text in the 5th chapter of the book of Acts. And, of course, Ananias and Sapphira, they both died in church. And had to get, it was funny, there was guys there to carry them out and bury them, man. They didn't fool around back in them days. There's a strange thing, and it's a little verse in there. It says, and at least the shadow of Peter fell across people, and they were healed. We all have a shadow that can pass across people's lives and be a help and a blessing and encouragement to them.